Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Law 101. Another episode, another interesting topic that Mr. Andy Chemachuk will talk about. And Law 101 is created to empower law itself because I believe that ignorance of the law excuse no one. Right, Mr. Andy?
Yes, correct.
So, what will be our topic for today?
Well, I thought it would be helpful for the listeners to learn a little bit about immigration, and I was thinking we could use the United States as the topic, basic
Yes,
immigration law and concepts, so people become more familiar with the immigration process and how they might benefit from it.
definitely. So, what are the basic procedures?
Okay, so let's start by understanding uh, categories of individuals in American society. The principal type of person or type of category is a U.S. citizen. A U.S.
Yes,
citizen is either someone who was born in the United States and by the Constitution is entitled to citizenship because of that fact, or someone who may be naturalized and become a U.S. citizen by virtue of immigrating to the United States. There are also other types of individuals who could be American citizens or become American citizens by right of derivative status, meaning they are children of or descendants of U.S. citizens and therefore can make a claim to U.S. citizens by virtue of their relationship to the parent or family member. Those are just basically the three kinds or categories of citizens that there are. Most people that will be listening to this podcast are likely going to fit into the category of naturalized citizens if they move to the United States and eventually settle there. So let's talk more about that aspect of how do you become a U.S. citizen if you were not born there. Now, there are people who take their children or children to be born to the United States, women in particular who are expecting that travel to the U.S. to give birth to a child so that that child has U.S. citizenship. But such situations are frowned on by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. And President Trump is actually even proposing that this the right of citizenship just because of birth should be limited and should not be granted to just anyone. That there should be some limitations on along the lines of the parent having been in the United States or being in the United States as part of the entitlement process. But that's down the road. Right now, if you're born in the U.S., that is to say, for example, if your mother takes you and you're born in the U.S., that is enough to establish citizenship.
automatic.
Right. So let's
Yes.
talk now about how do you immigrate or how do you become a citizen if you're not a citizen by way of naturalization. That is to say, by applying to become a citizen. And to do that, you have to be a permanent resident. Now, just to be clear on the various kinds of individuals who may be in the US, I've already mentioned citizens.
Yes.
And now I'm going into the category of permanent residents. And I'm then going to go into the category of people who are non citizens, who are immigrants, and who are in the United States in various visa statuses. We'll come to those. But let's talk about permanent residents first. So, a
Yes.
permanent resident is someone who came to the US and or is coming to the US and has applied to become a permanent resident, that is to say, an immigrant, as opposed to a non-immigrant. Non-immigrants are people like students, workers on, let's say, for example, H-1B visas or TN visas, and the like, others like interns and things of this nature. They are all non-immigrants. We will come to them, but let's talk about permanent residents, that is to say, immigrants at this moment. So if that's okay with you, Daniel, I'll continue.
Yes, go ahead,
Okay.
Mr. Andy.
So with respect to who is a permanent resident, to become a permanent resident, you have to apply. And there are certain ways that you can become a permanent resident. I'm going to list the most frequently used ways and talk about each one. So, for
Yes.
example, you can be sponsored as a family member. An example could be you marry someone who's a US citizen, and that person sponsors you. And by virtue of being sponsored by an American citizen, you as a foreigner can become eligible to get what's called a green card. And a green card means that you have evidence, the green card is your evidence that you have become a permanent resident. And a permanent resident uh, has certain rights, and we'll come to that in a second, but I just want to mention other ways that you can become a permanent resident. So, one is family based sponsorship. And among those who can sponsor you for a family based green card are spouses,
Yes.
parents, children, uh, and other relatives, like, for example, uh, someone who might be related to you, um, like a brother or sister, as an example. Now, there is much that can be discussed about this, but basically, the sponsorship by a family member is sufficient to ultimately get you permanent residence. That's one way to become a permanent resident. Now, another way you can become a permanent resident is through economic sponsorship. For example, if an employer likes you and wants to
Yes.
sponsor you, it may be possible for that employer to sponsor you to come and become a permanent resident of the United States. There's a process involved. You have to go through U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, in both instances, family and economic, and get approval from the government for you to come to the United States. Economic immigrants can also be investors, investors who apply through, for example, the EB-5 program, where they invest a certain amount of money for a period of time. The most popular one is the EB-5 Regional Center program that enables investors to get green cards if they invest the sum of $800,000, usually for a period of at least 2 or 3 years, and most popularly about 5 or 6 years. That results in them getting permanent residence, that is to say, a green card, and at the end of the time period, their money back. So, for example, someone may be building a hotel and they are operating what's called a regional center, which is an organization that's been approved by the government to enable investors to apply to get permanent residence by investing in their project, the hotel. And so an investor might invest $800,000 with the developer who's developing the hotel, and as part of that investment, get the permission for that investor to come and get permanent residence in the United States. So that's a second, well, that's part of the economic category that I mentioned before. Uh, I mentioned family and also mentioned economic categories of people who could come to the US and become permanent residents. Now, there are some special categories where, for example, religious people might be able to get permanent residence, or, for example, diversity green card lottery winners can get a green card and become permanent residents,
Yes.
or people who served in the army or in the military for the United States can apply for permanent residence. These are other ways. Or, for example, a student could eventually make their way towards permanent residence, uh, assuming they go through the labor way, that is to say, this other category, which would be an employer sponsors you and follows a process called labor certification and PERM, which is a way that someone can be sponsored to stay in the United States permanently. That process requires the employer to show that there are no American workers ready, willing, and able to take the job that the employer wants to offer to the foreign worker. If they can prove to the Department of Labor that there are no such uh, workers ready, willing, and able to take a position, and that they want to offer that position, the employer wants to offer that position to a foreigner, then the Department of Labor will certify the job and make it possible for the employer to sponsor the employee to stay in the United States permanently. Now, what's the difference between citizenship and permanent residence?
Yes. What's the difference, mister?
Okay. A citizen uh, is someone who has the same rights as a permanent resident, but also has the right to vote, has the right to run for office, for example, Congress, be a senator or congressman, or various officials in government, local, state, and federal governments, whereas permanent residents cannot. And they also can be in the police force in security matters where residence is important, or citizenship is important. Those are the key ingredients to citizenship. Also, they can live anywhere and travel back to the United States at any time without restriction, because as of right, they have the right to come into the United States. So they don't have to explain where they were and for how long. They can enter the United States because they are citizens. What is more important also is that they can pass down their citizenship to family members, as I mentioned earlier, through derivative citizenship. So if I'm a son of a US citizen, I can claim citizenship by virtue of being the son of a US citizen. And there are certain rules that govern whether I'd be entitled or not, depending on how long the parent lived in the US and before they left or whatever. But the derivative right to citizenship is one of the key elements. Also, citizens are taxed differently and, and less aggressively, shall we say, than permanent residents for estate tax purposes. So if you're a citizen, you won't be hammered, shall we say, like maybe a permanent resident would be if you die. Another important aspect of citizenship that people need to know about U.S. citizenship is that U.S. citizens are taxed on worldwide income, no matter where the income is earned. Each year they have to pay taxes on their worldwide income. So not
Wow.
everybody wants to be a U.S. citizen. Some people don't want to be and want to renounce their U.S. citizenship. And we help people with that at Pace Law Firm, where I work, as well as people who want to become citizens. So that's citizenship. Permanent residence means that you have the right to reside in the United States and that essentially, to put it in layman's terms, your heart belongs in the United States. So, for example, you could have three residences, one in Paris, one in London, and one in New York. But the one in New York is where your heart is. It's
Yes.
where your what they call your domicile is. This is where you call, that's what you call home. That's your home. And how they determine whether New York is your home and domicile is they ask, uh, do you work in the United States? Do you live in the United States? You know, and when you travel abroad, they ask, how long have you been away? And if you've been away for longer than 6 months, then the U.S. Customs and Border Protection people investigate or inquire with you, why were you away? And did you abandon your U.S. permanent residence? But so long as you were away for less than 6 months, you're usually safe in coming home back to the United States.
So, Miss Andy, how about the role of asylum and refugee program in the U.S. immigration?
Well, that's a great question because it leads us to the third category of people. Just reminding everybody, there's the category of citizens, there's the
Yes.
category of permanent residents, and then there's the category of non immigrants who are coming to the US. So, non immigrants are people like asylum seekers, but also people like students and workers. For example, there are workers who are coming under the free trade agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the United States, the so called USMCA in the United States, the US Canada Mexico Free Trade Agreement, where they come to work for a period of time, but they are required to leave after that period of time. So, broadly speaking, that category enables people to be in the U.S. for the period of time that they've been approved for to do what they have been approved to do. So, in the case of workers, it's to work for the employers or wherever they have been designated as their right to work. For students to study at the place where they're studying, for interns to intern with groups that they're interning with. And then there's the category of asylum seekers, people who are claiming to come to the US under international agreements. And in particular, they are claiming that they have a right to come to the US because they have a well founded fear of persecution based on one of the grounds that are generally accepted for asylum purposes, such as, for example, that they have a well founded fear of persecution if they return to their country of citizenship because of race, religion, ethnic origin, political opinion, gender, and a few other social group and other such categories generally. So the most prevalent one usually is religion. For example, a Muslim may be escaping from a Christian country or a Christian from a Muslim country as one a way of seeking asylum, or sometimes it may be political opinion. They are, for example, someone fleeing from Russia or China because let's say you're not a communist and you're in China, so you want to escape, or you're a Uyghur and for religious reasons you're escaping, or Russia, you don't agree with the leadership in Russia, so you're escaping. So those are the ways that uh, asylum people can claim the right to come to the United States. But uh, there is at the moment some restrictions that are being placed there are restrictions being placed on asylum seekers coming to the U.S., especially on the southern border, the one with Mexico. Um, it's been the experience of the United States that too many people have crossed the border illegally, that is
Yes.
to say, without the right to come to the United States, to attempt to stay and live and work in the United States without permission. And so this last election appeared to be an election over immigration issues, and Trump appears to have won in some, to some degree because he has promised to be hard on asylum seekers seeking to come to the United States. So uh, there are now uh, there is another category of people who are in the United States. Again, I just might review that there are citizens, permanent residents,
Yes.
immigrants, and then non-immigrants, which included the working category, students, interns, and people like that, and the asylum seekers. But there are also what people refer to as undocumented immigrants or migrants. These are people who live in the United States and have come to the United States, but not legally. They did not get visas to come or enter the US. They entered illegally, probably crossing the southern border at night or whatever it might be. Or a lot of such individuals come as visitors flying into the US and then become what might be called overstays, people who are in the US beyond their period of authorized stay and have not returned back to their country of origin and remain in the US. In the case of such individuals, at the moment, it's generally accepted there are about 11 million unauthorized, undocumented aliens living in the United States. And this is what Trump has declared he wants to tackle. He wants to deport these 11 million undocumented aliens or immigrants back to their countries of origin. Now, a few words about such individuals in the U.S. Firstly, it's probably more than 11 million, but it's hard to keep records on everybody who's undocumented and in the US. But even if we go with a category of 11 million, my understanding from reading in the literature is that there is about a million or possibly a million and a half of those people who are either people convicted of criminal offenses or who have been ordered deported but have not left the United States. And they are, at the moment, the priority of the US government to deport such individuals. And they certainly will be the priority for President Trump when he comes to power to deport those individuals. And by and large, I would say most Americans, and even people who aren't Americans, uh, can agree that such individuals who have no right to be in the US and have been ordered to leave or who are criminals and have committed criminal offenses, those people should be deported and removed from the United States. I don't think there's much debate over that. It's been the policy for many years, and it will continue to be the policy with President Trump. However, that leaves us, let's say, 12 million. I'm sorry.
11
See,
million.
I'm a lawyer. I didn't go to be an accountant because the accounting and the math doesn't work for me, as you can see. But so that leaves us 10 million roughly
Yes.
immigrants who are not documented and who are in the U.S. And if we look into that 10 million, here's what we find. Probably about half of them, let's say 5 million, are Mexican. The other half are from other countries. So Mexico is a source country of many undocumented American immigrants. In addition, at least half of the 10 million, that means 5 million, have been in the United States for over 10 years. They are what you call long-term residents, albeit undocumented, but long-term residents of the United States for over 10 years. So that gives you a sense of who's who among those 11 million. Now, my argument is that uh, deporting 11 million undocumented immigrants is a tall order and indeed impractical. But you could develop a policy to deal with such individuals. And I just wrote an article on Forbes that if the listeners are interested in this, they might look up dealing with exactly this issue. Actually, I haven't published it. I'm going to publish it tomorrow. Um, and today is December, what's today? December 18th, 2024. So tomorrow I should have it up. But the point I make is this, that these people who are in the US and who are not lawfully present should be afforded some way of correcting their problem. And I argue as follows. Is this okay, Daniel? Does this make sense to you? Are you following?
Yes, it makes sense.
Have I put you to
Great
put you
topic.
to sleep yet or not?
No, it's a great topic, Mr. Andy.
Okay,
I learn a lot. Go
okay,
ahead.
all right. So let's carry on. So the point I make is this: believe it or not,
Yes.
America has always had people coming who were unauthorized to come to the United States, from the indigenous first people who came to American lands, through to those who came from Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America over the years, especially the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, to those Europeans who came uh, and went westward to settle the western lands without authorization and displacing the indigenous native population without any right to do so. Uh, American history is full of examples of people who have come without authorization and become part of the American uh, drama.
Not
So it's no
American
different
dream.
today than it was in years past. And we have the second odd situation, which is those people who are angry at these unlawful, undocumented immigrants in the United States argue that no undocumented immigrant should be entitled to stay because they broke the law. They violated the law in coming to the United States, and they do not merit uh, the right to stay. But the odd and curious situation is the new commander in I said cheese, but that was a mistake. It's chief. Chief.
Chief,
The new
yeah.
commander in chief, President Trump, himself has not been known to abide by the law and has been actually convicted not once but several times of not abiding by the
The
law.
law. Yes.
And so he is in charge of enforcing this law. And there's a principle at law, common law, that says he who seeks equity, legally equity, must have clean hands, is the way it's put in the
Innocent.
so so unfortunately the president does not have the clean hands needed in order to enforce what he's about to try and do. And indeed, if you consider it for a moment, one can ask, uh, he who is out he who is without sin, let him cast the first stone.
Stone.
And you can say, for example, in my case, just as an example, am I perfect? Do I abide by every law? Have I never gotten a speeding ticket? Have I never gotten a parking ticket? You know, uh, it's like there's a lot of things. You know, have I been honest and never taken, for example, office supplies home from the office? You know, scenarios like that where you can say, "Oh, I'm a saint, and therefore I'm entitled to throw the first stone." Not many of us can say that. I don't think, it's going to be a rare person who can say that. So this notion that you cannot forgive someone because they broke the law is, I think, a notion that's just not defendable. But uh, that's not to say that someone who came to the U.S. without lawful entry is entitled to stay for those reasons alone. I would argue that the person has to make good in some way, build up the equities to be entitled to the right of stay in the US. But the equities can be things like this. I mentioned earlier, for example, that uh, 5 million or more of these immigrants that are in the US have been in the US for over 10 years. You know, living in the US for 10 years, belonging to the community, contributing to the community, going to church, participating in community affairs, sending your children to school, supporting the school, and things of that nature. By doing that, you're building up your equities, and therefore the issue of entitlement becomes, a little more clear for such individuals. So I would argue that such individuals, yes, should be punished because they came illegally.
Illegally.
It may be a fine, it may be 500 hours of community service that they must fulfill. And the way I would say it is I would say, yes, you can stay and enter as a or become a permanent resident if you satisfy some requirements, such as pay a fine of $1,000, uh, perform 500 hours of community service, for example, serving in hospitals or seniors' homes, helping people who are sick or elderly, cleaning streets of all the garbage on the highways and the streets in the inner cities, uh, uh, painting over graffiti on the walls of the cities, cleaning up the cities, planting trees, whatever it might be. But 500 hours, for example, of community service to earn your way into the permission to stay permanently. I think that would be a reasonable way to deal with these people who otherwise, uh, right now, they're going to try to deport all these people. And just a few more comments about this. And I see we're kind of running out of time here, but
Yes.
let me just finish with a few other comments. Uh, Deporting is one thing, but to deport, you have to have a country on the other side that says, yes, okay, we'll take these people back. Not every country is prepared to accept people from the United States coming back, even if they are citizens of that country. So you have to get agreement from these countries. And the more people you're trying to deport, the harder it's going to be to get the agreement and the arrangement, make the arrangements for these people to go back to where they came from. That's one thing, you know. And the other thing is, if you can't get them out, what are you going to do with them? You're going to put them in internment camps in the United States. So they're going to be in almost concentration camps waiting for some kind of decision about them. Now, what good is that? You withdraw people from the economy, productive
Yes.
citizens, and contributors to American society, often doing work that Americans themselves don't want to do, low
Yes.
grade work. because that's what they can do. That's what they have. They don't have rights to do anything else. And put them in internment camps. Now, what good is that going to do for the American economy? And the final argument I would put forward is if you're going to do something with regard to immigrants that have come without permission, you have to address the problem of why did they come to the United States in the first place? And the problem is, in many instances, it's because things at home are not so good. And they escaped and they came because of fear of being persecuted. The wars, civil wars, upheavals, gangsters beating up on them, no future, impossible futures for the family and the kids, and so on. These are reasons why people are coming to America. So instead of deporting these people back to where they came from, keep them as constructive members of society, albeit that they have to pay for the transgression that they
Did.
committed,
Yes.
and uh, instead support countries abroad and help them become better economically situated and improved in terms of their social, economic, and legal stability, political stability, so that less people end up at your doorstep, instead of closing off your society, building a wall, putting up tariffs, and thereby preventing the flow of trade and commerce with these countries and the prospects for investing and sharing know-how and so on, um, and building up those societies economically to make it possible for everyone to prosper. Anyway, that's a long way of saying that's the
Yes.
situation right now. We can talk more next time, Daniel, but I'm very grateful for this opportunity to lay down.
Definitely. Thank you, Mr. Andy. But to sum up our discussion, Mr. Andy, how has immigration policy in the US changed over the last 20 years?
Well, the main issue that's come up is the issue of the southern border not being closed to non for people who do not have permission to come to the United States. That's been the biggest problem. And also, America has changed substantially uh, from the moment Trump uh, appeared in the political sphere and his run for president previously and this time. The severity and the hardness of an immigration policy has been significantly amplified. It is uh, the policy, American immigration policy, except for the exception of Biden's time and perhaps before Trump. But essentially, in the last, we're going to say in the last 20 years, what's happening is America's closing itself off. It's becoming an isolated society, and it wants to repel people who have come to America without proper documents and exclude and uh, shut down even legal immigration more than any time in the past.
Yes. Interesting topic, Mr. Andy. And people, if you are empowered of Mr. Andy topics for today, please do participate and let us know what topic you want to discuss. So, Mr. Andy, thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Daniel. Always good to talk to you.
More to come, people. See you soon. Thank you, Mr. Andy. So let's do next year available.